Welcome back to Building a Fighter. My name is Dr. Austin Shane, sports chiropractor in Scottsdale, Arizona. With me, as always, bad ass strength coach in Denver, Colorado, Alex Friedman. Today, we're going to be talking about our most effective wrestling techniques that transfer over from the mat in wrestling to the cage in MMA. And realistically, we're going to give 4 to 5 different options of what we think are the best potential moves that you can get good at and transfer into our MMA practice. So, Alex, what's number one?
Well, I think it's a bread and butter move, and for whatever reason, I've always ingrained it in my head that over or underhooks are better than overhooks. Right? It's
Yes.
inside
Yeah.
position. A lot of people like to attack from that overhook, but our most foundational, most successful move, if you will, or tool for wrestling into MMA is the underhook, right? The underhook and establishing a dominant position, specifically a deep underhook where my shoulder is lower than my opponent's shoulder, right? I feel like I have to specify that because I see so many shallow bullshit
Dude, I
wannabe
see it all the time.
wannabe underhooks.
I see that all the time going into like a sparring day where they'll try to like grab an underhook and they end up with their arm almost like straight-ish or like
Yeah,
kind of bent, and that's like no man's land. You're
yeah.
either in or you're out when we're grappling, and if we're out,
Mhm.
you better be the fuck out, otherwise that guy's going to take you down.
But 100%, the underhook serves so many purposes, right? It enables our offense, gives us
Yep.
inside position and a track to a leg or a track to an upper body attack. It plays defense for our of our lead side, right? When we're pummeling or when we're against the cage, give me leverage to control position against the cage, right? How many times have you seen that guy gets an underhook off the cage and then you see the guys in a spin cycle just pushing from underhook to underhook to underhook? It's like, mm, own the position, right?
It's a great middle step. It
Yeah.
it's the in between of, all right, I closed my distance, I needed to get control. All right, I'm going to use this control into whatever my attack is going to be. Because a lot of
Yeah.
the times the underhook itself isn't the attack. I mean, we can go to like a far ankle tap, like an ankle tap or an or
Knee tap.
I was thinking more like a single leg, like using it to throw by to a single leg. Like the underhook itself is typically the setup to our attack. It's not normally how we take our opponent down, right?
Right. I agree.
But I would argue it's probably the most important thing that transfers from wrestling into MMA because of all the things you already listed, because of the leverage advantage,
Hmm.
because if you have an underhook, you should be in. Your hips are in. You're in good position because it allows us to go from a wrestling position to a striking position. If I roll my thumb, separate, strike, and then go in, and that's my setup into my shot. Or it allows me to go straight to my grappling by going after what we'll talk about later, body locks, leg attacks, stuff like that. It's just like the foundational thing to learn because
Yeah.
it does all of that and it's applicable on and off the cage.
Yeah, and I think something you said that was really subtle. That's like I think also a really big principle that transfers over is your hip positioning,
Yep.
right? Like we talk about wrestlers' hips and here and there, but like especially when we're both vertical pummeling in an underhook scenario or just wrestling, the guy who has his hips in wins, right?
Well,
I
and the
don't
guy that has his hips out is getting kneed.
100%. I don't have any offensive options with my hips away, right? I'm stalling slash tired slash have horrible posture, right? As soon as you learn that kind of Greco step where you lead with your leg and get your hips in and it can load your opponent up, you're going to be super dangerous on the cage because you have the lower center of gravity. You have access to all the offense. The other person has the higher center of gravity and is getting manipulated and manhandled.
It's just it's think I think about underhooks kind of like car jacks. That's basically
Yeah.
all it is. It allows me to get to that position to where I can then accomplish what I want to.
100%.
And
So you're talking about a lot of attacks from the underhook. Like your
look at this
underhook
guy. You knew where I was going.
is the middleman. Yeah, but I'm going to hit you with a question here. What do you think is a more effective and viable attack coming off of your underhook? The body lock or the single leg?
We're talking for MMA
For MMA.
body lock.
Yep. I totally agree.
I believe for two reasons. Number one, I believe it's because it allows me to control, like have a control moment where even if I miss, I'm still in a perfect position. Even if I can't get to my attack right away on my body lock, I really haven't changed or given anything up. If I drop to a single leg and they just kick out because they're not wearing shoes, which wrestlers transitioning, you guys don't
Yeah.
understand how much wrestling shoes make a difference when it
Yeah.
goes to finishing a shot,
Yep.
right? They can't just kick away from you and just turn their hips and like snake leg. It's very different. And because of that, if I go after a single leg and I miss and a guy just kicks out, I just lost and wasted all that energy.
Yeah.
If I go after a body lock on that, and as long as I grab my body lock or I stay in a good position and both my arms are down close to around the waist and touching, that's a position I'm probably not going to lose in. I might not win there,
Yeah.
but I am at the advantage.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And I think one thing to recognize and realize is that body locks come in different qualities, right? Just because you have your arms locked around your opponent's body or hips does not make that body lock effective, right? It puts you in a position certainly of advantage, and it gives you an opportunity. But if you are not tight with your elbows, you don't know how to roll and squeeze and kind of put pressure on your opponent, right? Or stay tight and hide your lock, right? Some of those key details are so integral. If you can't do some of that stuff, you're not going to finish your body lock attacks, right? That's the quality of the body lock matters. And I think that's another really transferable skill from, specifically freestyle wrestling and Greco-Roman for like gut wrenches,
Yep.
right? Like if we're going to do a vertical gut wrench, it's literally just a body lock throw, right? And so it's like we have to be able to squeeze the elbows, kind of roll into the tightness and off balance our opponent, not by consciously moving them, but just via positioning.
Right. Well, and that's kind of going into it's just as important where you're talking about it, getting into that
Mhm.
like control position and positioning,
Yeah.
is it is to my number two on why a body lock's more important. And number two is as I get to the ground, I am in a more controlled position.
Yeah.
If I go after a single leg, we know there we got our trip series. We can go into a dump series. We can run the
Mhm.
pipe. We can cut it down and then go after collect the other ankle. We can switch underneath. There's all these different options, but a lot of them end us up in a position where we have to scramble up to the hips to solidify it once we
Mhm.
get into a grappling exchange on the ground. A body lock as we go through, no matter how I finish, my arms are already up in that control position. They're there at whether they're as
Mhm.
high up as I need them to be. And that allows me to A, immediately get to my transitions if I want to try to pass and get where I want to be. Or B, if I end up in like a half guard that I can lock down, it
Yeah.
allows me to already be there and I can position myself in a way that I can go to my standing half guard. Really, it's just postured up half guard and go after what I want to. So it's just a control factor of once it gets to the ground, if I have a waist, I'm a lot better off than if I have a leg.
And it's such a subtle, like I said, advantage or comfort thing for wrestlers finishing body locks versus other people I've watched finish body locks. Do not let go of your lock on the way down. I watched so many people
I
do
know. They think
this.
they're going to get rolled through.
They think they're
Everyone.
going to roll through and they break their hands, and then that immediately opens the window for the guy to pop up and scramble
Yeah.
again, right? Like this secondary control or this like um, I call it like taking away your opponent's options, right? Like high level wrestling. When I'm on defense in my high level wrestling, and a lot of guys like rely on this exclusively, I just look for holes in my opponent's offense.
Mhm.
Right. I'm not like consciously attacking a whole lot of stuff, but as soon as that person gets a little lazy with their lock, shoot an underhook in there. As soon as they start to loosen their grip, they might be getting a takedown, quote unquote, and I might like hit my hip. But if they haven't like secured and really bulletproof their finish, I'm right back up.
Yep.
Right. And so I think that's a key thing that the high level wrestlers do is they control the takedown all the way to the mat and then look for advancing position, look for the chain wrestling, quote unquote, right away. Where other guys that are newer to wrestling are just still learning the craft. They're like, oh, I'm going to get a takedown. Hell yeah. Now I got to do jujitsu. And they like let go and try and jump to the upper body. And then as soon as that happens, the wrestler is out. So
100%.
yeah, one thing I is like keep your lock, but also find a secondary form of control before you start to advance position.
Right. Well, that's a huge one. And then one of the tips I see that a lot of people that go from not wrestling as their background like to do when they get a body lock is they think a body lock is just squeezing the other person to them. right? They think
Yeah.
it's a straight vector. There's no rotation involved. It's just, all
Yeah.
right, I got my hands locked and I'm just going to pull you directly backwards.
Yep.
And that's not how good wrestlers body lock.
No.
It's almost as if you're trying to make a J with your
Mhm.
arms, where you're going down, you're scooping underneath their rib cage or their spine, and then
Yeah.
pulling them up to where I'm lifting their center of gravity with my torque motion movement.
Yeah.
It's more similar to from a strength and conditioning standpoint, it's more similar to a front pull, like a plate loaded pull down, that movement where it's fluid and I'm going like in a J pattern, as opposed to a straight tripod row or a straight bent over row.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it has to have that arc, and if I don't have that arc and get really underneath their rib cage with my hands, if I'm doing a gut wrench, or like underneath the lower part of the middle of their back to get that lock, if I'm doing a body lock, then it's not going to work as effectively. And
Mhm.
there's no way that if you wrestle a good wrestler, they're not just going to be able to dig an underhook right underneath and work their way out. That's what eliminates the space, and eliminating the space is what leads to success with a body lock.
I totally agree. I totally agree in that. Like the one way that I've communicated it, and again, maybe I'm just being a super nerd and it doesn't land at all, but I say it a lot, so it makes me feel good.
That's
Is
what
I
the
talk
podcast is for. It's about making us feel good.
I talk about the three planes of movement, right? And this is a nice little segue to our
I do
single leg
too. I know exactly what you're talking
because
about.
it's
Yeah.
the most apparent on a single leg, like finishing on a
Yeah.
dump single. You have to rotate, move backward, and squat at the same time, right? If you miss one of those three, it's defended, right? You don't have enough tension and pressure to actually off balance the person to make them fall on their butt. But if I stay tight with my shoulder and head intact on the single leg and then I go for my dump, I got to spiral backwards as I squat, right? I need all three of those components. If I just spiral, right, then we're going in a circle. If I just step backward, I've pulled you off the wall. If I just squat, you're going to get your leg, it's going to loosen up, right? So you need all three of those components to really make an appropriate like dump off your single leg, which has to be something that's practiced 1.5 million times.
Right. My biggest pet peeve is when you've been working with somebody for like years and they still
Hmm.
hit a dump without dropping that vertical plane.
Yeah, or like bowing. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, yeah, they just hinge at the hip instead of dropping their weight down.
yeah,
That pisses me off so much because
yeah,
it's so easy to fix.
yeah. Right. It's like,
But no, you're right. I teach it the exact same way. It nerds me out too, or it's definitely me nerding out. But
yeah,
I feel like once you teach it, and I always draw like the axis,
yeah,
or it's like you're here. If I'm on camera now, you're
yeah.
here. In order to get that person down in three planes of movement, we need to go not just here, not
Mhm.
just here, but here and corkscrew down for the
Yeah,
Z plane. If you don't understand that, then you're not going to get it. And my beam giving like the actual not verbal, ocular, the actual drawing for
yeah,
them, the actual visual stimulus is what I was
yeah.
looking for.
Visual cue. Yeah.
It they don't get it, but once they see it on a graph, completely understand because they know exactly what's going on.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe I'll try that with drawing it out a little bit. But uh,
That's what
I think
iPads are
that
for, homie.
what's up?
So that's what iPads are for, homie.
I suppose. But no, I think that's a good segue into like our next most effective transferable skills is single leg.
Yeah.
Single legs are notoriously common, but very seldomly finished. Right? Single leg is a
Yeah.
harder is for,
I mean, it's the most finished technique in all of wrestling.
but not MMA.
Correct.
Right? So if we're talking about MMA, single legs are your like entry or
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
base
It's
attack,
your starting point.
but they're
It's like an
not.
underhook.
Yeah, but yeah, they're not a lot of times the finishing technique in MMA. Like if you got a killer like dump finish off your single, I fucking love it. I love watching like an effective single leg
DC.
be
DC
hit
single was probably the best ever in MMA.
100%. So but for the masses, your single leg is like your chain or like your prelude or your move to thread. And the way I've argued this with my team is the more effective your single leg attack is, the more effective your next chains will be.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I can genuinely off balance you with my single leg, whether it's an elevation, whether it's a dump finish, whether whatever it is, if I get an effective off balance, I can chain wrestle without a whole lot of worry.
Yeah,
But if my
that's true.
single leg is bullshit and then I try to chain to like a double, my wrist is getting caught and they're just finding an escape.
Right.
Right. And so
Like
I think that off balance is key.
I think a single leg is really good at the setup, like you said, but it's also really good at allowing me to get in closer. Like a single leg's a really good way to kind of climb up the chain
Yeah.
to a common thing I'll do is grab a single leg, try the dump. If they can't get to the dump, I'm going to step in with my outside leg, the one behind them. I'm going to go up to a body lock from there. And then
Mm-hmm.
once I'm in close like that, I can transition to whatever I want. Once I'm on a body lock, I could drop back to a single if I feel like I could dump. I could switch over to a double leg. That's another cool part about a body lock. All I got to do is get my hands from above the ass to below the ass, and I have a double
Mm-hmm.
leg.
Yep.
Yay! Or I can literally use my single leg. I can do that dump. If I don't like it, I'll throw it through, come up top, and then go back into a wrestling attack. The single leg itself just opens up a lot of different variety
Yeah.
that you can start to play with. But I am in the camp of I mean leg attacks are crucial. Leg attacks are needed. But if I had to teach somebody from day one that's trying to become an MMA fighter, I would go body lock over single leg as the first thing they learn. Like I wouldn't teach them a drop step. I wouldn't do. I mean, we've seen football players come in and legitimately just tackle people.
Yeah.
That tells me that even though I'm a wrestling purist at heart, that
Mm-hmm.
tells me that the low, I guess the technique of lower body attacks may not be as important as horsepower sometimes.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting debate there because one thing I think I've established in my kind of theory is that folk style wrestling is your most solid base for MMA. I
Yep.
think because it prioritizes control, right? Not maybe not specifically for the takedown, but once we're wrestling in folk style, I know how to ride on top. I know how to maintain a position, right? It's not just turn or reset. But in what you're saying, I think a lot of the Greco-Roman stuff is super valuable when we're on a cage, when we're actually trying to
Correct.
finish a takedown. I think the Greco-Roman takes a little bit more precedence there.
I would say overall, I completely agree with you. I think folk style wrestling is probably the most important, but that doesn't mean, in my mind, that it's got to be a leg attack style like base,
Yeah, yeah,
even though
yeah.
it's super important.
You
Yeah,
can attack upper body and folk style for
yeah.
sure.
No, I do agree. Folk style is by far the best, I guess, base for MMA. I think
Yeah.
because of that control. And I also think the one other thing is it's the scrambling ability. The ability to float sets you
Hmm.
apart so much.
Yeah.
Like even in like jujitsu, where we've talked about it, jujitsu hips are different than wrestling hips.
Yeah.
But I think the ability to scramble kind of negates that a little bit. The
Yeah.
ability to roll and the ability to like feel comfortable and or I call it like gyroscope hips to where you're
Yeah.
always facing down.
Yeah, that's huge. And that was going to be my immediate critique. And obviously, and absolutely, there's some jujitsu guys that can beat me this way. But I can't stand when guys are comfortable being underneath another person,
Hate it.
right? Like something I started telling a lot of my MMA guys, if you are on your back in an MMA fight, you are losing. Like
I
don't
always
trust.
listen. Do you remember
Yeah.
the Paul Giamatti wrestling movie? The
No.
one where he had this kid from New Jersey, just like this some delinquent kid that came
Yeah.
from New
Yeah.
Jersey, and he's the wrestling coach. This kid's a New Jersey state champ. He
Yeah.
transferred to so I don't remember what state, and the kid was really good. And Paul's character is like terrible coach, trying to ask him like, "How'd you get so good? How do you get out from under bottom?" He's like, "I just imagine I'm drowning. I just do whatever the fuck it takes."
Yeah.
And so he
Right.
just makes the drill, do whatever the fuck it takes.
Yeah.
But
Right.
every time somebody talks about, like, being comfortable on bottom, that's the
Yeah.
first thing that pops in my head because that's
Yeah.
how I felt on bottom. I literally felt like I was drowning when somebody
Yeah.
was on top of me, and I
Or
wanna get out.
even like if I'm on top and I have my hooks in, you
Yeah,
shouldn't be comfortable
right, you should be uncomfortable with that.
laying on your side or on your back, right? Like sure you have your hooks in, but that's
Yeah,
not a winning position, right? You have to find a different transition because one big priority, like I think, if I can have my hooks in and get my opponent face down, I'm gonna fucking win. That's a TKO waiting to happen, right? Where it's like if you just got your hooks in, but roll to your back or you go for the body triangle, like you're a winning position, but you're not automatically ending the fight. If
right.
I get my hooks in and I got my opponent face down, is gonna be game. It's like that
It's gonna
close,
take that
just
guy a
that
lot of
close.
effort to get away from end zone.
Yeah, so I think face down and like you're saying, those gyroscope hips where I'm always kind of hips facing the mat is a huge skill that transfers over.
For sure. Well, we were talking about single legs first. I don't know how we got there, but
Yeah, hips and
single
legs.
legs. What's some of your favorite entrances when it comes to hitting singles in MMA?
Oh man, I even like just a straight up like matchup snatch single, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I think those work really well still in MMA with a low risk factor, right? I can change levels, drop. If the leg's there, I snatch it. If it's not there, no harm, no foul. It was just a level change, right? And then use it as feint. I like that. I like certain punch combinations. Like I think a 1-1-2 works really well for that. But the punches I think are less important than a continual like feint of a level change,
I agree.
right? If
Yeah.
I can freeze you, get your feet set, and make you think about what's happening, right? I use the word occupy. Occupy the hands. Occupy somehow. And occupy doesn't just mean like I'm throwing shit, making you do a high guard. It means I'm getting you to think upstairs while I level change downstairs, right? So it's like occupy the brain with feints, occupy the hands literally with punches. That works sometimes too, right? So I think those are some of my like best entries. Honestly, that's the hardest part for my wrestling game right now is finding the
100%.
entries.
Yeah, finding the entries and not getting hit.
Yeah. No
Because
knees. No
yeah,
knees.
that's what
Anti knee
everybody
club.
thinks. Something I love to hit, or something that I've really liked that Angel shows, and I learned it in high school. It's called a Cuban step because I learned it from a Cuban, but they call it a Russian step.
Okay.
Is where they have a matchup. They almost do like an S step
Okay.
on their matchup single so that their foot either ends up inside or outside depending on where their head wants to be. So if they want to turn it into an outside single,
Yeah.
they would start or they would start left foot forward, right arm forward, and then flip flop as they go
Yeah.
outside because that sets them up
Interesting.
for a dump immediately. Or if they want
Yeah.
to go head inside, they would be leading the opposite, hit an S step, and then go up to the top of the thigh, which allows them to have a higher fulcrum to
Yeah.
where they can move up to the body, down if I want to dump, and or hit that like he has like a Russian whip that'll hit out of it too.
No, interesting. Yeah, I like those entries for sure.
Yeah.
Um, well, moving on. I think
Big goals,
segue
huh? Well, see you
segues.
later.
Yeah, segues. No, but I think one of the last effective wrestling techniques that I think is a lot of times underrated in our MMA like kind of meta, I guess, if you
Yeah.
will, is simply a wrist ride, right? If I
Yes.
can gain wrist control, whether it's 2-on-1 or just 1-on-1, if I can hold that wrist and dominate that position, one, my person's not escaping into like a guard, right? That's the biggest thing for me is like if I have a wrist ride, I'm making sure they stay wrestling and I can work from that, and I feel advantaged there. Two, it takes away a post for them to
Mhm.
like get up and move, right? And so specifically, if you can get like a staple with the top leg across the body and a wrist right on the backside, that person is stuck.
Right. No, we call it. I mean, we see the Daggies do it all the time. Like
Yeah,
we call it a Dagestani handcuff, and it's just because as
yeah,
soon as they grab it, that wrist is theirs now. It
yeah,
is locked in.
yeah,
And it's so effective at a few different things. But I think one of the main ones is putting pressure forward, right?
yeah,
It like Alex was talking about, you can't post, you can't do these things. Well, what in theory does that do? Think we have them on the cage, we have a far side wrist ride. That allows me to put pressure on that far shoulder, which keeps the pressure going forward at all points and times. Guess
yeah,
what? If the pressure's always going forward, we can't get our hips underneath. As soon as they can't get their hips underneath, they can't get up. So they're stuck.
yep,
And but it all comes from where is the pressure applied and how do I get the best, I guess, lock or the best way to apply it. And I haven't found anything that's, but you could go after what do they call it in jiu-jitsu? It's almost like a backpack position.
Oh, you're talking about a seatbelt.
Yeah, seatbelt. You
I
can go after
hate
seat. You can go a
I hate
seatbelt. You
seatbelts.
can do. It's nothing is better than a wrist ride when it
Yeah,
comes to putting pressure on one shoulder because it allows me to focalize the. I mean, the biomechanics of it allows me to focalize the the GH joint into a way that puts it into internal rotation to where the only way out would be into the cage. So as long
yeah,
as I keep my pressure forward, it creates a better fulcrum to where they can't get out. As if I have a seatbelt, I can't make that fulcrum because it's not as, I guess, like pinpoint of pressure.
Yeah, and I think it allows a lot of wrestlers to take further advantage of this like other subtle skill, which is hand fighting.
Yes.
Right, hand fighting is such a underrated like valuable skills that wrestlers learn so early on. Right, whether we're on our feet in a like a clinch type situation, an over under, whether we're on the mat in a wrist ride. Right, like it was puzzling to me when I was coaching MMA athlete. It was like clear your wrist. Like,
And they wouldn't do
how?
it.
What? What do you mean?
Yeah.
How? It's like, motherfucker, you don't know how to roll a wrist, like, And so it's such an underrated skill that I think a lot of wrestlers have inherently or have from their background, right? That just a simple hand fight and like owning the grip, right? Like your grip strength is developed a hundredfold in wrestling for you know whatever reason, and so it's like let's use that hand fight, let's use that control, let's use that like commitment to a hand fight to your advantage.
Right. Well, and like we're talking about a wrist ride from like the top bottom position.
Yeah,
Something that again, something DC used to do all the time. Like you say occupy. We were talking about
yeah,
that with the single legs with the body locks. Occupying the hands in like a 2-on-1, occupying the wrists where I'm just grabbing them when we're up there and I
yeah,
can throw an elbow over the top. That is still a
yeah,
wrist ride in and of itself. I'm
yeah,
using the wrist as a way to create a lever on the
yeah.
arm, which puts me at an advantage. That allows me to progress and go into whatever strike or whatever attack I want to do. Now, a wrist ride on the top, I think, is the best, but that's something that I feel like a lot of people overlook when we're in that range where they're not
Hmm.
going after and trying to do a wrist ride from standing to then pull down. It's almost like a parry, if you will,
Hmm.
but it's from a wrestling perspective. It gets me closer to where I can come over the top, throw an elbow, and I'm already behind right into my body lock position, which if I'm a wrestler, that's where I want to be. It gets me to my attacks instead of waiting in somebody else's range.
Yeah, and it's specifically like you said, leveraging your skills versus your execution, right?
Mhm.
It's like this new striking and everything is super valuable. Like I truly believe that. But like if you're a wrestler, use it.
Yeah,
Use it to your advantage.
I actually just had the opposite conversation recently with an athlete where world champ kickboxer, and we're a wrestling gym,
Yeah.
and I'm like, hey,
Get
like
the fuck
they
out.
were they were talking about in their fight that actually just got called off. They're talking about how like yeah, I want to go out there, I want to be able to kind of like put it on them with pace wise and be able to wrestle like the whole time, and I'm like,
Hmm. Why?
that's I thought I'm like, that's cool. You don't get paid by the minute. I understand if this was like a amateur fight, but this is a
Yeah.
pro fight. Let's go make money.
Yeah, that's a wild assertion. I think is like some guys just are misled. It's
Yeah.
like strikers specifically, like, and I get it. Like the wrestling is tempting, and like sometimes you specifically like leave an opening. It's like no, stay wrestling with me. Keep like here's this single, take it. Like I've literally watched one of our fighters in the gym who's a phenomenal wrestler, and he'll like lean back in his stance and like stick his leg is like, please take the single, take the single, take the single. Let's wrestle. Because even though he's at a bad position wrestling, that's still a better situation than him striking.
And he knows where he can rest there.
100%. Yeah. So it's like one of the best quotes that we had Lisa Bowling on way back when. I don't even know if that episode got published because of the connectivity
I think it
issues.
got corrupted.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
connectivity issues. But he's like, I made a career coaching MMA fighters how to anti wrestle, how to not wrestle,
Yeah.
And that's like one of the biggest things. It's like, all right, you're devastating with your hands and your striking. Let's work on ways to get the fuck out. Like GTFO is always a chain wrestling option,
What are some of
especially
those
if you got
ways?
hands. Find underhooks, find inside positions, and then just choose to disengage. Right, like
True.
that's one of
And
my biggest things.
one of my biggest ones, and
Risk
I guess
control.
this could be well risk control for sure. This could be probably number 5, knee slides.
Yeah,
The amount of athletes that don't know how to knee slide or do a changeover blows my mind when that's just a basic way to create separation, create space. Talk about getting the fuck away.
yeah.
The best way to get out if you are stuck against the cage is to do a near elbow near or a knee slide that separates space that puts them behind you, and now I have space to then stand up and dig an underhook.
And yeah, and then you have your hips underneath you, right? Like
Yep.
those are just mechanics to get your hips back underneath you, right? Which is the bare necessity to be able to wrestle.
Right. But I feel like that's something that isn't practiced or taught or whatever as much as it should be. That was like the bread and butter of my bottom wrestling. back in
Mm-hmm.
the day. Like I had the same sequence. I'd like to try for the first time against somebody is I would do a near side. What was it? It was a near side elbow with a knee slide. If that didn't work, I'd hit a changeover, go to the other side, do an opposite side knee slide. If that didn't work, I'm going right up to a stand up. If that didn't work, I'm going to go right into a hip heist. And then if they somehow follow that hip heist, I'm right into a Granby off that. And I
Right.
would try that on every single. That's how I could do that in under 7 seconds. So I did Malachek's rule.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would flow through that chain and it worked a lot. But guess what? 2 of those 5 sequences are knee slides. And
Yeah.
it's something that needs to be trained over and over and over again. So, Alex, what goes into a good knee slide?
Honestly, I think not overextending. I think a lot of
Yeah,
people shoot their
huge.
knee way too far on a
Yeah.
knee slide, and they get their shoulders behind their hips, right? Like we're talking. I was just talking about getting your hips underneath you. Like that's a basic athletic rule. Your hips
Yeah.
underneath you lead you to athletic maneuvers,
Right.
right?
Shoulders back is just as bad as shoulders forward.
Yeah, 100%. So I think a lot of people overshoot on a knee slide. Like a knee slide is not like a fucking limbo matrix type of movement, right? I'm still getting my shoulders kind of balled up. The other thing I see is a lot of instability when I'm on a knee, right? Like we get too tall or we get too narrow. It's like from that knee slide position, when I punch my knee to my opposite hand, right? I want to bring my hips under me and I'm still staying in a tight ball with like maybe a foot and a hand out postwise, right? That'll keep me in that position. I call it our phase one. And at the high school, I teach an inside stand up, which preludes all of this, right?
Yep.
Phase one is I elbow the guy in the chest behind me. I pivot my inside foot up, and now I'm in like a phase one position, which is the end of a knee slide. I need to be bulletproof in that position. I need to be stable. I need to be like a rock. You can't push or move me. I'm planted in the ground. And so finding that position, being really strong and stable there, and I guess not overextending are some of my keys in a knee slide.
Okay. My biggest one for people at home that if they have trouble with knee slides, you at home are trying to create your separation with your lower body when you should be
Mm-hmm.
creating your separation with your upper body. That's the number one thing that comes to a knee slide. Everybody thinks, oh, I got to cover more distance. I got to cover more distance. That's when they get overextended, like Alex says. And like I said earlier, having your shoulders in front of your hips is just as bad as having your shoulders behind your hips. It's all about trying to be stacked in that vertical orientation. So, what 2 things that I'd have my athletes do. The first one is I always do a hip switch to a shin box to show them how to essentially stay up in that position because a shin box is basically just a knee slide, right? So
Yep.
I'll have them go through that pattern. If you don't know what that is, hit up YouTube. We got tutorials. But hip switch to a shin box. I'll have them do that for 2 or 3 sets of 10, just to A, see how their hip mobility is, and B, to get them to understand how to balance up on a knee. Then I'll have them try to do a hip heist off the wall. Once they understand a hip heist off the wall, and why I'm doing that is in order to do a hip heist off a wall, you have to use your shoulder to create separation, right? Otherwise, your face hits itself on the wall every single time you hip heist. So the only way to create that separation is I'm going to have them do that hip heist 10, 15, 20 times using whichever opposite shoulder it is. Use that to create your space. And I tell them try to get as far off the wall as possible. All right, now they understand that the upper body creates separation. Now, I'll have them go into a knee slide position where somebody has that top bottom. I'll either have them in a chop down position or I'll have them on an elbow. And then I'm going to say, all right, so how did you create separation with your hip heist? Oh, I used my shoulder. Okay, so what's right underneath the shoulder? And what actually can develop more force? Oh, the elbow. So now I want you to do the same thing, but instead of using your shoulder to push off the wall, I want you to use your elbow to push off the person on top of you. And that is the thing that clicks. Because you shouldn't be trying to overextend with the lower body on a knee slide. That ends me up in a terrible position. The best way to knee slide is really you're only moving probably half of what you think you are, but you're also moving the person on top of you backwards half of, or double what you think they're going to be. So you
Yep.
get to the same position, but now you're stacked and that person on top has the added stimulus of fuck, that hurt. And I don't like that. And don't get
Yep.
me wrong, I've got hit with potentially dangerous before with that or with unnecessary roughness, whatever the fuck it is. But I'm not doing it to take the dude's head off. I'm doing it to create separation and I'm aiming literally directly for the middle of their chest. And that's how you get to a successful knee slide. If I'm going inside, that's really, from what I've found, the only way to get to a really good position and have as much space as possible. Outside's a little bit different, but for the MMA purposes, we're not doing outside knee slides, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, totally agree. No, that pressure back, right, is what this like the age old wrestling tectonic plate example. Like you pressure back, they pressure forward, you come up, right, and you get away. So I think that pressure back is huge, right? If you're continually just running forward, it's easy to follow. But
100%.
as soon as I mix up my directions, aka give pressure back, give pressure forward, that will create the space and the misalignment on the timing, just like our level changes, right? Like if I can misalign somebody on a level change timing, that means I have an opportunity to get in. If I can misalign somebody on like a push pull from the top bottom knee slide position, that means I can create space.
Yeah. And also, while we're still talking about wrestling, because this will be the last thing to bore you guys with wrestling,
Yeah.
one of the spaces that I think is so underutilized is doing a step through off of a crackdown. And what I mean by that is so many people, when they go for a crackdown, they basically go opposite sides. So what a crackdown is, for the people at home, if you're a striker, somebody hits a high crotch or a head outside single or a high crotch, they sit me to my butt and I'm sitting on my butt, or I'm with my weight on my heels, and they're trying to put pressure on my hips to lock me in and go to their next chain. Right? So they're grabbing a single leg, I'm on my ass. So many people, they go after the far leg when the near leg, if all I do is just shove their shoulder out of the inside of my thigh to the outside and I just push it just a little bit, there is a clear lane to just
Yep.
reshoot right on them. Like
Yep.
the clearest of lanes and one of the tightest spaces where you know you're going to succeed. But for whatever reason, we only are taught to go after the far side. Except
Yep.
for the person that I saw do this the most is David Taylor. David Taylor used to hit this on everybody. And you can do it standing, you can do it
Well,
seated,
they
you can do it on a
find
knee.
yeah, David Taylor and Bo Niggle even found like cradles out of that
Yeah.
position a
Yep.
ton.
Like
Um,
I literally, like, the key to it is, though, is you need to take that shoulder out of your belly button or out of your hip and put it to your oblique or put it to the outside of your leg. If they have the angle on you, which means that their
yeah.
shoulder is midline on you, you cannot hit this. You'll get speared and put back.
Yeah.
But
Well,
if you create an angle and separation or just a little bit of a pivot, that's what allows me to just shoot my arm right through, go after my own shot, and then drive across.
honestly, one of the best examples you could ask for in MMA for this is when Connor stuffed Khabib's shot.
Yep,
And I
100%.
think was that early second when he did that. But
Yes,
in
because that
that
was the round
fight,
I think that was the round he won. Yeah.
yeah, I think early on in that fight, he stuffs exactly what this takedown or this defense that Austin's talking about on the crackdown, and then he pressures back in, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
that
it's a concept that I talk about with Angel all the time, but like when I'm on defense, I'm not actually defending.
counter
I'm
offense.
just using your offense against you, and I'm going to score.
Yeah,
And so many times when we get shot on, we immediately go into, oh, I don't want to get taken down.
hmm
Instead of, what this is doing is it's saying, all right, you shot on me, you fucked up. I'm going to take you down now.
well, I
And
think
that changing that way that you think about it
yeah,
is really how you get to the next level utilizing wrestling in
yeah,
MMA.
100%. That attitude, like personified, like you're feeding the hips in and you're attacking with your counter offense versus like what I see a lot from jujitsu is I'll give my hips so that I
Mhm.
can start attacking chokes and I can like get to a guard. Like that pulling of the guard, like it gets so much hate and it fucking should,
Well, it
bro.
breaks the number one rule I ever learned about jujitsu, which is position before submission.
Right. Yeah, 100%. But like, don't give your hips, right? Like, feed your hips. Like, I can't tell you how many good wrestlers, and I've wrestled that I just hit them with a hard sprawl,
Yeah.
right? You don't even have to like legs back. You just deliver a blow with their hips and they like sit their ass to their heels and get smushed, right? It's such a attitude type of
Right.
move,
Well,
right?
that's
And so,
honestly, like, that's why I'm so happy that I grew up wrestling, because it gives you
yeah.
that fucking it gives you that ability to be mean when you have to.
Yeah, and that's like one of the ways that I explain it. And I promise I'm not going to turn on to hate jujitsu, but
Oh, we can.
jujitsu
I got
jujitsu
time.
is so much of like a go with the flow and accept the
Yeah.
position and move on, right? wrestling is the fucking bare opposite. It's fucking rage against that position and force your will, right? It's like such a push to where jujitsu is like such the pull,
Right.
right?
And
And
there's a need for both.
yeah, but
But I like the second
we
one.
prefer the wrestling.
Yeah.
But
Some people like the first one. That opinion's wrong. The second one.
yeah, for sure.
No, so that's our top 5 wrestling, I guess, maneuvers or characteristics that we think translate to MMA. Let me, for the TLDR, if you didn't listen to anything, this will be noted at 420 or 4025. So it's underhooks, body locks, single legs, wrist rides, and knee slides. Those are the 5 characteristics that we think if you get better at, that will elevate your wrestling for MMA. So if you
Wrist
guys get
ride,
it,
one thing, wrist rides and knee slides is a good title for instructional.
we can make a book.
Wrist rides and knee
I
slides.
like it. If you guys want to look for any instructionals, now if you want to look for any strength and conditioning equipment programming, we have that available at buildingafighter.com. Custom options, preset options, membership options, they're all there for you. So hit us up, buildingafighter.com. And if you guys got to get in touch with us, all that info is in the show notes. That's going to be both Instagrams and emails. This is Dr. Austin Shane,
Alex Friedman.
and we are out.